Now, I am delighted to have Dr. Matweychuk here today. Dr. Matweychuk, he has worked with Albert Ellis. He has been trained by Albert Ellis. So that's how he started. And he has worked with Aaron Beck, two of the primary people in Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. He teaches at University of Pennsylvania, and he lectures at NYU. And he's a practitioner psychotherapist. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Walter.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. I am delighted to be here talking about rational emotive behavior therapy. Am I coming across loud and clear?
Walter, just one sec. I want to give one direction to people here. Folks, I've looked at this presentation. It is very rich in concepts. So I recommend having a pen and a paper with you, keeping track of your questions. You can go ahead and type in your questions in the chat. Keep track of everything that you have. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A session. So whatever questions you have will get answered, and it will be in the first come, first serve mode. So please go ahead and type in your questions in the chat and keep track of all the questions that you have and all the thoughts that you have. All right, sorry about the interruption, Walter. You sound great. Over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much. And what I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about rational emotive behavior therapy, because I'm a clinical psychologist. I practice at the University of Pennsylvania, and my mission in life is to disseminate REBT and introduce it to the widest possible audience. I had the good fortune of being trained by Dr. Albert Ellis, and he always said that rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT, was an amalgamation of ancient and modern philosophy, and that its roots lied in Stoicism. It heavily borrows from Stoicism. So some years back, I decided to deepen my appreciation of REBT by studying Stoicism. And let me start by saying that in 1955, the psychotherapeutic establishment was psychoanalytical, and its derivatives from Freud. And Ellis was trained in that tradition, but found it to be inefficient and unhelpful. And so, he decided to break away from the psychoanalytical tradition and develop his own psychotherapy. And in order to do that, he borrowed heavily from Stoicism. REBT, unlike other cognitive behavior therapies, was developed in the rough and tumble streets of Manhattan. And when you develop a psychotherapy in the real world, you'll have people come in with multiple diagnoses. You don't have the luxury of picking a certain type of individual. So REBT, from its outset, has been a practical approach to dealing with challenging psychiatric or psychological, emotional, behavioral disorders, as well as problems of daily living, existential challenges that we all face. Ellis was a practitioner who was tireless, and from sunrise to sunset, he saw people 6 days a week and had over 180,000 hours of face-to-face clinical time. And I think he really derived meaning and happiness and personal strength because REBT was a philosophically based psychotherapy. So Al, this is Al, who is now deceased. At a picture I took at his 80th birthday, he is doing two things at once. He's pricking his finger, taking his blood sugar because he was insulin diabetic from the age of 40, and he lived to the ripe old age of 94, a month short of his 94th birthday. And that's his office in New York City. And what I'm going to propose is that if you practice Stoicism, then you would be well advised to inform yourself of rational emotive behavior therapy, because you'll like it and probably end up using some of it. REBT is a evidence-based cognitive behavior therapy. In fact, it's the initial cognitive behavior therapy, but it's very, it lends itself to self-help and the application of it to oneself. And so it will assist you in implementing your Stoic virtues. And so in the words of Epictetus, what I'd like to do is introduce some of the core concepts of REBT and show you how, using certain quotes from Epictetus, how it links back and stands on the shoulders of Stoicism. So this is Epictetus's famous dictum. It's not events that disturb people, it's their judgments concerning them. So make a practice at once of saying to every strong impression, an impression is all you are, not the source of the impression. Then test and assess it with your criteria, but one primarily, is this something that is or is not in my control? And if it's not one of the things that you control, be ready with the reaction, then it's none of my concern. So, consistent with Stoic philosophy, REBT argues that adversity in and of itself is insufficient to produce self-defeating, maladaptive disturbance, emotional and behavioral disturbance. We define emotional disturbance as emotional and behavioral reactions to life that are self-defeating, unhealthy, and undermine our primary goals of survival and happiness. Our view is that all other goals and values more or less are subsumed under the categories of survival and happiness. And Al introduced in 1955 the ABC model, whereby he argued that adversity at point A did not directly lead to emotional consequences, but that our attitudes about adversity came between the adversity and our emotional reactions. And so you could see here a parallel to Epictetus's dictum that it's not events that disturb us, but our views, our impressions of them. And here you see the REBT model arguing that our attitudes play an incredibly important role in determining our emotional consequences. Before psychotherapy, people will often wrongly say that emotional upset is the result of the conditions of life that they encounter, or the emotional upset is the reaction, is the result of what other people do in their environment, and they're more or less victims of that. And what we're going to do in REBT is liberate people from this model of reacting emotionally to circumstances and show them how they disturb themselves by holding rigid and extreme attitudes about the challenges they face. Now, what we're going to argue in REBT is that some negative emotion is quite healthy. So not all negative emotion and the behavioral reactions that go with negative emotion should be erased or eliminated. We're going to make a distinction between healthy negative emotions that are self-helping and lead to productive action, and unhealthy negative emotions. So we have two boxes of emotions, and when our desires at point A, adversity, are not met, when our desires, our wishes are not met, we're going to be sad and disappointed. We're going to be concerned when things might not go our way, and that these are healthy negative emotions. Now, the 8 basic healthy negative emotions, which will lead to productive action, have their unhealthy counterparts. And so concern and anxiety are distinct. We're going to argue that REBT is going to help you not eliminate negative emotion, but transform anxiety into concern, transform depression into a healthy sadness. A word about anger, jealousy, and envy. Our English language is a little bit light when it comes to having good discriminating words. And so we're going to argue that there are two qualitatively different anger states, one being dysfunctional or unproductive anger, Seneca wrote on anger, or healthy anger, which is productive and leads to productive action against things we don't like or think are unjust. Same with jealousy and envy, that there's a healthy envy that we can have in life that actually helps us learn from others. Now, one of the things that we do is define things quite precisely. And so in the characteristics of unhealthy negative emotions in REBT are that they're self-defeating, they interfere with living well with that which cannot be changed. Unhealthy negative emotions undermine our efforts to improve things. They can lead to self-defeating excessive behaviors like aggressive behavior. They can lead to unhealthy self-defeating behavior like avoidance, whether it be physical avoidance where you procrastinate or delay, or is experiential avoidance where you engage in distraction through drugs, alcohol, sex, TV to a self-defeating extent. And unhealthy negative emotion prevents having some degree of happiness in the presence of unchangeable adversity. On the other hand, the characteristics of healthy negative emotions, emotions like concern and sadness and disappointment, they are feedback. They are emotions that provide feedback. Now, the unhealthy negative emotions are also feedback. But what we're going to argue is that the healthy negative emotions are feedback that help us creatively change what can be changed. We don't undermine our efforts to our long-term goals when we're under the influence of a healthy negative emotion. And for me, what's really important is living well in the face of adversity. Sometimes we can't change adversity quickly, we can't change it at all. And from the REBT perspective, one can still have some degree of happiness in the presence of adversity. They're going to acknowledge a certain amount of sorrow or sadness or disappointment, or they're going to acknowledge a certain amount of concern. But nevertheless, these healthy negative emotions are going to allow us also to see that while we work to change things that we don't like, we still can have some degree of happiness. Now, the unhealthy self-defeating negative emotions are going to undermine our ability to not only change what we can change, but also to have some degree of happiness while adverse situations exist. And of course, there will always, you can't stop the waves, you can only learn to surf them. So for example, the adversities are going to come one after another. And so therefore, REBT really liberates you to react to circumstances in such a way that you can live a happy, productive life. So one of the, I think I've gone through most of those points. Let's go back to Epictetus here. Remember that you're an actor in a play, the nature of which is up to the director to decide. If he wants the play to be short, it will be short. If he wants it to be long, it will be long. If he casts you as one of the poor, as a cripple, as a king or a commoner, whatever the role assigned, the accomplished actor will accept and perform it with impartial skill. But the assignment of roles belongs to another. Now, I think Epictetus is saying a great deal here that is highly consistent with REBT. He goes on to say, don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. This is the path to peace. REBT, I think, borrows from these ideas and talks a lot about acceptance. And we precisely define acceptance as an acknowledgement that a state of affairs exists which is against our goals and values. Think pandemic. Acknowledge that it would be preferable if this particular reality did not exist. We also acknowledge in our active form of acceptance that even though it's preferable that a reality not exist, we acknowledge that it doesn't logically follow to conclude or jump to the idea that reality must not exist as it does, yet we remain with firm determination to change the negative existing conditions if they can be changed, and we try to do that. A lot of times we have to toil at things and not even know if we're ever going to be successful. But we also remain equally determined to adjust constructively while the adverse conditions exist, if they can't be changed, or while they exist, even if they can be, but for the duration of their existence. So REBT has a very precise definition of acceptance. It is a very active form, and it's not to be confused with simple resignation. In the words of Epictetus, it's not events that disturb people, it's their judgments concerning them. Death, for example, is nothing frightening. Otherwise, it would have frightened Socrates. But the judgment that death is frightening, now that is something to be afraid of. So when we are frustrated, angry, or unhappy, never hold anyone except ourselves. That is our judgments accountable. Now, here you see Epictetus talking about personal responsibility for our emotional reactions to life. And in REBT, we have the principle of emotional responsibility. And that principle states that we largely disturb ourselves, that it doesn't just happen to us. We construct it. We're constructivists. We are not victims of adversity so much as victims of our rigid and extreme attitudes about what other people do to us and what fate throws our way. And we almost always have some degree of emotional choice. Now, that doesn't mean we can be happy. That might be off the table under certain conditions, but we don't necessarily have to be miserable. We have a position that we can have some degree of happiness and have healthy negative emotions. Now, we're going to acknowledge that humans are helped along in their feelings by what happens in reality, but at the same time, we play a very important role in disturbing ourselves by holding rigid and extreme attitudes about adversity. We disturb ourselves, and in the process of therapy, I challenge people by saying, how are you angering yourself about your colleague's misbehavior, about your wife's misbehavior? How are you depressing yourself about social distancing? How are you frightening yourself about what's possible? And what attitude would help you to respond in a productive and healthy emotional way to this adversity and live well with it? So you can see that I am trying to show people that you really disturb yourself and you can construct healthy negative emotions. My good friend, co-author, and mentor, Wendy Dryden, took Epictetus's dictum and tweaked it a bit and changed it to, it's not events that disturb people. It's their rigid and extreme attitudes concerning those events that disturb them. Remember, it's not enough, said Epictetus, to be hit or insulted, to be harmed. You must believe you are being harmed. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. So REBT and Stoicism can make you impervious to insults by teaching you to have healthy attitudes, which allow you not to be complicit and take an insult that's hurled at you and then use it as the other person intended it to disturb you. You can fend it off psychologically. So if you hold a healthy attitude, if you hold an unhealthy attitude, for example, like my colleague made me angry, or my colleague didn't show me the respect I deserve, as they must do, then we're going to be prone to anger and insult. So what we're going to try to do is help people develop a tough-minded stance and show them how to relinquish the rigid and extreme attitudes and replace them with healthy and flexible, not extreme attitudes, from dealing with small things like insults, acts of disrespect, a lack of cooperation, all the way up to very challenging things like pandemics, social distancing, the loss of loved ones, the potential threat to your health. So we're going to teach people to adopt alternative attitudes. So let's start with one that's perhaps easier to digest, where you hold the attitude, flexible attitude, like I won. I wish my colleague would cooperate with me. But they don't have to cooperate with me. I could choose a healthy attitude towards their disrespectful behavior, towards their uncooperative behavior, and take some steps to influence them to whatever extent I might be able to influence them. And this flexible attitude is going to lead to disappointment, sorrow, concern, possibly productive anger in matters that are very important. Now, REBT argues it's the human condition. We're born to disturb ourselves, that we easily do that, that to a greater or lesser extent, we're born, we learned a little bit from our culture what to disturb ourselves about. So we may learn to disturb ourselves about playing baseball poorly if you grow up in Philadelphia like I did, or we may learn to disturb ourselves about not taking good care to be sufficiently interested in the group if we grow up in the West. So what we disturb ourselves may be culturally derived or influenced or learned, but that humans have a natural propensity to disturb themselves by holding rigid attitudes. And these are rooted in our biology. It's the human condition. Now, the good news is that we also have a propensity to think in a flexible way. It's more fragile. It's like working with our non-dominant hand. It needs to be practiced and cultivated. But through using REBT, we can really minimize the extent to which we disturb ourselves and reduce the intensity, frequency, and duration by which this disturbance reveals itself. We never can perfect ourselves. We'll remain fallible humans. And nevertheless, we're not going to use that as an excuse for not moving towards higher levels of self-actualization. And we're going to not say, well, we're a fallible human, we can't do better. We're going to assume that we can grow as people and self-actualize, but it's going to take a tremendous amount of work and practice. Epictetus argued something similar. He said we must undergo a hard winter's training and not rush into things for which we haven't prepared. Well, REBT is going to argue that because we have this biological tendency, this natural human tendency to disturb ourselves, we're going to have to train ourselves to detect our irrational attitudes and then relinquish them through challenging them. But with effort, we can adopt healthy attitudes. But then again, because we're biologically inclined to think rigidly and in extreme ways, we're going to backslide, and that we're going to have to remain on guard against backsliding, so that this is a never-ending process of striving to improve our ability to adapt to the conditions of life. REBT is both a philosophy and a psychotherapy. And so as a therapy, it teaches people to question, relinquish irrational attitudes. But as a philosophy, it does suggest values that I will get to in the back. This is one of the big ways it differs from cognitive behavior therapy a la Beck. Beck developed cognitive behavior therapy from an empirically derived approach. And so it doesn't really have a philosophical underpinnings, where REBT has clear philosophical ideas that we're going to talk about and suggest people consider. So learning that does not lead to action is useless, Epictetus said. Well, in REBT, we take that and run with it. We're going to argue that, look, not only in an individual therapy session or not only in a group session, but also through a self-help book or by going to my website, rebtdoctor.com, you can work on yourself. You can practice examining the functional impairment that follows from your rigid and extreme thinking. You can practice examining whether it's true or untrue, these ideas. You can, through practice and repetition, develop and adopt rational attitudes, but most importantly, as Epictetus taught, you need to live in harmony with them. You need to walk the talk, because that is really how you develop deep conviction in the attitudes that we're going to teach you. Now, the REBT theory holds that there are 4 basic attitudes. One's primary and 3 are derivatives. The rigid process that Ellis took aim at was what he humorously called masturbation. Now, it can also be referred to as demandingness. And the idea here is that when we disturb ourselves, we hold rigid, absolutistic, dogmatic ideas and attitudes that are inconsistent with empirical data. They're anti-scientific. They're expressed with words like must, absolutely, should, have to, need to.
It's 3 o'clock.
It's not these words that we're targeting. We're targeting rigid thinking. And so the word is not as important as the stance that the person has. For example, I can say to you, look, if you want to be fit, you should exercise. That's a conditional form of logic that is completely consistent with empirical reality. If you want to increase the probability of staying healthy, you should socially isolate. That is an empirically verifiable ideal. What we're taking aim at is the absolutistic thinking that people easily adopt. Well, if it's good to do, then I absolutely should do it. Well, fallible humans don't always do what is good to do. And so that's where we begin to show people that it's the rigid attitudes, the underlying dogmatic musts. Now, Ellis argued that you can assume that that all your dogmatic musts fall into 3 major headings. 1, they're placed on yourself. I absolutely must perform well on important projects and be approved of by significant people, or else I'm inadequate and unlovable as a person. So the rigid thinking is on my performance. 2, other people, you who I've cared for and treated well, absolutely must treat me equally well, kindly, fairly, or else you're a rotten person who deserves to suffer. Now the must is directed at you. And finally, the must can be directed at life. The conditions under which I live absolutely must be easy, unfrustrating, predictable, secure, not too hard, enjoyable, or else the world's an awful place. I can't stand it. I'll never be happy. Pandemics must not exist. Well, that's empirically inconsistent with reality right now. You certainly would like them not to exist. Now, REBT argues that from the must, 3 derivatives are spawned. One we call, and these are extreme attitudes, that's what they have in common, a tendency to rate things beyond 100% bad. From a logical standpoint, nothing could be more than 100% bad, but awful, terrible, the end of the world, when properly defined, suggests something that's off the chart. And we're going to argue that awful really doesn't exist, that bad events, very bad events, incredibly bad events happen, but no matter how bad events are, it's conceivable they can be worse. And so we're always going to teach people to pivot towards this is really bad, but it's not the end of the world. We need to kind of figure out how best to cope with it. So that's one process. The other derivative is what we call discomfort disturbance, where we say, first, the conditions of life must be comfortable, easy, and if it's not, I can't stand it, it's unbearable. And people will have this kind of attitude when they pursue certain goals. You know, I really want to be successful at my career, but it must not be so hard to achieve this success. It shouldn't require such a great price, and I can't stand to pay that price. So that would be an example of discomfort disturbance thinking. And then we can devalue not only ourselves when we hold a must. For example, I have to do perfectly well, and if I don't do ideally well or as well as I must or should do, then I'm a bad person. We can devalue you. If you don't treat me as you must, you are a jerk, you are a bad person. Notice we're rating them, and then we can do that with life. Life is all bad. When there's a pandemic, there's no good in life. Life is all bad. The flexible attitudes that are the counter and healthy attitudes are expressed with words like want, wish, desire, and end it with an acknowledgement that despite what we wish, existing conditions do not have to be as we want them to be or wish them to be. So I wish my colleague would respect me and cooperate, but they don't have to do so. I wish pandemics didn't occur every 100 years, but sadly they do, or at least they do now. And it doesn't follow that this must not exist. It does. And now what are we going to do about it? So there's an acknowledgement that our preference doesn't have to be met. The non-extreme attitudes are phrased as it is bad, undesirable, or incredibly bad when you lose a loved one, but not awful, not terrible, not the end of the world. It's uncomfortable, not unbearable, not intolerable. It's something I can endure, or something, it is uncomfortable, but not unendurable, something I cannot survive. So that pivot, acknowledging that you could bear it. Then finally, and this is one of the most important ideas, I think, in REBT, is the idea that people are in a state of flux, they do bad things, but it's mythical to think of people as monsters or as saints or as sinners. These are fairy tales. People exist, and bad people are false to the facts. People do bad things, certainly, and we need to hold them accountable, but we really, if we're going to think in a sensible way, we're going to argue that people do bad things, they do good things, but their essential human worth cannot be summated and measured. So we're going to teach self-acceptance that's unconditional. Even when I act poorly, I can accept myself, but I better examine what I've done in order to do better so that I learn. I'm going to accept you even when you treat me badly. I'm going to accept you as a person, but I may very well penalize you or hold you accountable. And I'm going to unconditionally accept life even when there are rough patches in life. And I'm going to maintain a healthy attitude and a healthy emotional reaction to life by having this unconditional life acceptance. If you're tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity, so said Epictetus. So be satisfied just being a philosopher. In other words, accept yourself. If you need a witness in addition, be your own, and you will be all the witness you could desire. Don't look for outside approval and say, I must have approval from other people. Accept yourself and stay within you. Here, he says, we use labels like thief and robber in connection with them, but what do these words mean? They merely signify that people are confused about what is good and what is bad, so we should be angry with them or should we pity them? Well, I'm going to argue that a thief is false to the facts. People engage in thievery, but they also are not stealing all the time. They may stop their stealing. And they may very well do what they do because they use bad judgment. They're confused about what is good and what is bad. And so we're going to agree with Epictetus in this regard, in that they're confused in many ways and that they're not thieves, but fallible humans. Epictetus argued, don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. This is the path to peace. I think here, Epictetus is inspiring others to consider something along the lines of unconditional life acceptance. Look, there are things you can control and like in life, and there are things you can't. And if you want to live a serene and peaceful life, you better focus on what you can control and relinquish this demand that the conditions of life must be as you want them to be. I spoke about how REBT I consider to be a philosophy. It's not just a psychotherapy. The things we teach people to consider is what we call enlightened self-interest, where we say, look, you might think of this as ethical self-interest as well, whereby you put yourself first and others a close second, not a distant second. Now, that doesn't mean that you're compulsively putting yourself first. You very well might sometimes put other people first because that's what you want. But the point being is that we're going to put the responsibility for your life back in your hands, and we want you to be self-directed and pursue what you want, take responsibility for your life, but consistent with Stoicism, we're going to argue that it's important for you to recognize that you live in a shared environment and that you would be well advised to help your fellow man and have a social interest, and because you're going to profit from it and other people will profit from it. So it's not a disproportionate self-involvement. It's just a slight balance towards taking care of yourself and putting others a close second. We're going to argue that you're in the best position to pursue what you want, not have other people tell you what you should do with your life. We're going to argue you better have high frustration tolerance because life involves quite a bit of adversity. And if you don't have the capacity to stick with things, you're going to have a problem. We're going to argue that, consistent with the Stoic virtue, say, of practical wisdom, that you better be flexible and scientific in your thinking and open to change and unbigoted. You better have tolerance for uncertainty, because if you hold the attitude that I have to be certain that my effort will pay off, you'll probably not do anything. So we're going to try to get you to say, I want to have certainty that my hard work will pay off, but I don't have to have it. We're going to encourage you to be able to tolerate that accept that we live in a probabilistic universe, and that's the best you're going to do. We want you to have a commitment to creative and meaningful pursuits. So in my case, it's the dissemination of REBT. It's to have intimate relations with friends and my wife. It's to enjoy the world, but that you can commit to either political activism, building a business, building a family. It doesn't matter what your pursuit is. It might be studying philosophy and scientific knowledge or developing a vaccine. We're going to argue that you had better develop self, other, and life acceptance, be capable of taking calculated risks. We're going to encourage you to have long-term hedonism. In other words, this is consistent with the Stoic virtue of temperance, whereby you live for today, but you also consider the fact that you're going to live tomorrow in all probability, and that you want to save some money for the future. You want to eat but not overeat. You want to enjoy but not overenjoy, so that you undermine your long-term well-being. And maximize your pleasure by having a judicious balance of what of the pleasure you have today versus the pleasure you'll have down the road. We want you to accept that you can't perfect yourself, and you'll never find a utopia. You can strive to make the world a better place, definitely, and you'd be well advised to do that. That will give you meaning. And also you can survive to improve how you conduct yourself in different situations to live more virtuously. Not that you're going to perfect yourself or make yourself a truly better person, but we're going to teach you, by using REBT, how to set goals and then act in a way that is consistent with your goals and values. And hopefully those goals and values are going to be goals and values that have social interest in mind. That you're going to be responsible for your emotional disturbance. That's the ABC model. Epictetus said, as with impressions, generally, if you get an impression of something pleasurable, watch yourself so that you're not carried away with it. This is temperance, I think he's talking about. Take a minute and let the matter wait on you. Then reflect on both intervals of time, the time you have to experience the pleasure and the time after its enjoyment that you will beat yourself up over. Well, in REBT, we're not going to want you to beat yourself up. We're just going to want you to put down what your indulgence. Contrast that how happy and pleased you'll be if you abstain. So he's talking about temperance. We're going to say in REBT, we want you to do the hedonic calculus and make sure that the pleasures of the moment, the indulgence of the moment, and the indulgence will not undermine or seriously lower your long-term well-being. And that's what he's talking about here, Epictetus, is if the chance to do the deed presents itself, take extra care that you're not overcome by its seductiveness, pleasure, and allure. Counter temptation by remembering how much better it will be, the knowledge that you've resisted. So I'm going to encourage you to add REBT to your study of Stoicism. It will help you implement some of the goals and values you have as a Stoic. It's consistent with Stoic philosophy. It's a tough-minded approach for helping you cope with your worst nightmare or adversity that may very well come to pass. And tomorrow is not guaranteed for any of us. And so REBT is going to help you have a healthy concern that's going to help you do what you can do to increase the probability that you and your loved ones will be okay tomorrow. But it's also going to help you accept your worst nightmare if it should happen. It's going to help you strive to live virtuously as a fallible human in a challenging world. This is a book that was originally written for professionals. It's a small book, but many patients have read it and told me that they've derived a great deal from it because it's, it's easy to understand. And really, I always say, in order to use REBT, you really have to understand REBT concepts. It's a concept-heavy approach. I suggest you go to rebtdoctor.com, sign up for my intermittent reinforcement email messages that go out intermittently, probably once or twice a month, and teach you these ideas. You could listen to audio and video that's there now and will be constantly updated. And you could buy some books and put it next to your Stoic books on the night table. Put it next to the discourses or the meditations. For example, How to Cope with Fatal Illness, The Rational Management of Death and Dying. How to Cope with Aging. We have a book Ellis wrote on how to cope with aging. How to stubbornly refuse to be miserable about anything, yes, anything. How to control anger before it controls you. So I think that I have pretty much ended on time. And so now it's time for Q&A.
Perfect. Perfect. This is wonderful, Walter. This was just great. All right, folks. So we've got 12 questions and we've got 45 minutes. Dr. Matweychuk has to leave at 4 o'clock. So we got 45 minutes and 12 questions. So here are the rules. I'm going to call upon you to ask the question. Please, when I call upon you, just unmute yourself, ask your questions, keep your questions as brief as possible because we want to get to everybody's questions. And as soon as you ask the questions, you unmute yourself. No follow-up questions. I would rather have as many people's questions answered as possible. At 4 o'clock, we're going to divide into small groups so we can discuss these ideas in great amount of detail. All right, so it's going to be Carl, then Isley, then Sanjay, Terry, Joseph, Ayala, Ingrid, Adam, Arturo, Jeff Shostak, Sana, and Ingrid in that order. Carl, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. And thank you, Walter, for that presentation. I think you touched on this briefly in the presentation. I was always curious, what was the key difference between CBT and REBT?
First of all, like Epictetus would say, you're a bit confused. So REBT is the pioneering form of cognitive behavior therapy. So CBT is an umbrella term. It's a generic term. Now, there are different cognitive approaches, one of which is REBT, one of which is Beck's cognitive therapy. Initially, Beck called it cognitive therapy of depression. Then he developed what he called cognitive therapy of anxiety. Being a physician, he was looking to create individualized, customized empirical approaches for different disorders. And then as time went on, he began to call it cognitive behavior therapy, which muddied the waters, because there are other cognitive behavioral therapies that don't have the word cognitive in it. For example, DBT, I think, has cognitive elements to it, dialectical behavior therapy, ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, although they define acceptance in a very different way, and they're cognitive in a very different way than REBT is. But the difference between REBT and cognitive therapy doesn't exist. REBT is a distinct form of cognitive behavior therapy.
Isley, you're next.
Hello, thank you so much for the presentation. I can see that the chat has lost my question, so I might not word it exactly the same, but thankfully it's the same question that keeps occurring throughout. And it is, what are we to do to know the difference between an impression that is creative and fulfilling and promising and one that is perhaps harmful? Like, how are we to know relative to where we might not have the awareness of how we respond to things? How are we to know?
Well, you can raise your awareness by, first of all, we're going to argue in REBT that impressions, inferences about what's going on in reality are found at too low. This is a technical idea, but see if you, hopefully you'll follow. This is something of an advanced idea, but at point A, adversity is an impression. For example, I could very well get rejected later today when I go to this social engagement or make this presentation. That's an impression. At C, we could get anxious, and then that might spawn other impressions. For example, I always fail. At point B, we're going to have probably a tacit attitude like I need the approval of other people to accept myself. Now, what we would argue, in order to have a better view of the quality of your impressions, your inferences, is that you first not disturb yourself, because when you are activated with unhealthy negative emotions, it's going to be hard for you to objectively evaluate your impressions. So when you're under the influence of concern, you're more likely about getting rejected later today. Let's assume I have concern that some of you are going to disagree with this presentation. Well, then I will say to myself, I want them to approve of me, but they don't have to. Now I'm going to be concerned, and I'm not likely to then think that I always fail. There are many, many, many people who say, wow, this is really special stuff. So you're going to have a better idea to objectively look at impressions of inferences if you are not in an unhealthy emotional state. Now, the other thing about impressions is Epictetus, I think, you could say impressions are at point A in the ABC model or at point B and at point C. So it depends upon how you define a impression. I'm going to define an impression as an inference. So for example, I have the impression you somewhat understand what I'm saying. I'm seeing you through a small box, but I think that's my impression. And I could be right, I could be wrong. Now, other people might see you, and I could, in order to evaluate that impression, I could ask other people, do you seem to think that my inference is accurate? So one way you can raise your awareness as to the quality and validity of your impressions is to get feedback from trusted others. But here's the problem. It's very hard to know what is reality. And so impressions are harder to agree upon. What we can do is we can develop healthy, flexible attitudes, like I hope I know what's going on in reality, but I don't have to have absolute certainty. And then I could go back and evaluate the impression.
Thank you, Walter. Next question is from Sanjay. Sanjay, go ahead, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, sorry, I was unmuting myself. So I actually have I don't know if this would be a compound question, but I first asked the question about when you said that
Sanjay, just let's keep it to just one question per person so we can get to, there are 14 questions in the line. Please go ahead.
Okay, no, it wasn't 2 questions, but so how can REBT be practiced as self-help if our behaviors are sometimes hidden from us, within our subconscious? And related to that, for example, we have sociopaths and psychopaths who don't know that they have these disturbances. So, it gets more complicated because of that.
Well, first of all, I don't quite buy the premise that we don't know our behavior. So that our behavior is unconscious. We may be reluctant to a fair and balanced evaluation of the consequences of our behavior. But I do think if we are getting bad results in the real world, if we're getting in trouble with the law, or if we're getting in trouble in our personal life, that's a strong indicator that something is amiss and that we'd be well advised to step back and look at our behavior and try to understand it from the ABC framework. Now, you could have sociopaths. Look, nothing works with everyone. Sociopaths are particularly hard to treat. People sometimes who are true sociopaths are best influenced by contingencies that are immediate, and that will help motivate them to change their behavior. But if you, I'm not making the argument that REBT is a perfect model. I think it's the best available psychotherapy. I say that shamelessly. I'm not arguing that it's a panacea. I don't, sociopaths, I think, need to be treated from a behavioral perspective. Society needs to create clear contingencies that will motivate people to change their behavior. We know that behavioral consequences influence our decisions. And there's no reason why. The problem is that behavioral consequences very often, because of the difficulty and complexity of life, are not immediately delivered. There's a delay, and sometimes they're delivered in a way that is either too much. People can be incentivized, and so it's REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, and we really buy into the idea that people respond to reinforcement and punishment, and that you really need to have a judicious balance of contingencies. And I didn't get into it here, but we could talk about how you reinforce yourself. Ellis used to talk about self-reinforcement and self-penalties, many of which people found to be kind of, like he would say, light a cigarette with a $20 bill. That's a penalty. If you want to quit smoking, every time you want to smoke, take out a $10 bill or a $5 bill or a $20 bill and light your cigarette, light the cigarette with that. So sociopaths, if we're talking about a small percentage of the population, I'm not sure you were talking about a large percentage here. And even those people get motivated to change when they realize that it's in their long-term best interest to change because there are clear contingencies.
Thank you, Doctor. The next one up is going to be Terry, Joseph, and then Ayala. Terry, go ahead.
Thanks, Walter. The Stoics, of course, held that you choose your reactions to events. And you've been saying, I think, that that, of course, is a matter of not automatic, but a matter of training and discipline and so on, and that REBT can help you with that. So I guess the question is, there's a lot of concern present about undergraduates, if you know any, well, you will, of course, know them, that they are extremely fragile because evidence, for example, needing trigger warnings all the time for things that would seem to be perfectly routine, like pieces of English literature. So I guess the question is, are the kids more fragile? And what's your advice for the kids and for their teachers about dealing with this fragility if it really exists? It's a cultivated fragility.
Yeah, that's a great question. I first of all, do not believe people are more fragile. People are people. I think what we've done is change people, I think in general, we're well-meaning in trying to make our environments more user-friendly. But at the same time, I think you raise an incredibly important point that we are not teaching. When I was growing up, I was taught sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. So yes, the idea of a trigger warning, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. I want to empower people to be able to respond to quote unquote triggers so that they don't have to be warned, that they have the fortitude to respond with a healthy negative emotion when they encounter stimuli from literature or from anywhere else that may in fact be associated with a bad memory. One of the things that we talk about in REBT is that you don't want to re-traumatize yourself to an event that happened in the past. So let's assume once I was jumped by 4 gentlemen in graduate school, and I swear I thought I would lose my life. I remember thinking to myself as we fought, look for metal. Now, I don't have any post-traumatic stress disorder. And if somebody were to show me a video of that incident, if there one existed, I'm certain that I would not need to be warned because of my training that I'm able to choose my emotions in response to both memories of the past, hypotheses about the future, and impressions of the present. So I do have a problem with trigger warnings. I think they're very popular and they're politically correct. But I want to teach people to empower themselves, liberate themselves.
Excellent. Next question is from Joseph. Joe, go ahead.
Hello, Doctor. Thank you for your presentation. It was very, very helpful. So understanding self-help and unhealthy self-help, the way I'm interpreting it is it's understanding the essence of emotion. But how does that relate to the Stoic philosophy with the discipline of action? And how do you balance helping others with helping yourself? Do you have any specific approaches that allow you to, demarcate exactly when it is for someone else or if you need to help yourself?
First of all, life is an art. I always say this to people, and that if you say to yourself, I have to know exactly, if you demand that you have the perfect algorithm for deciding how to proceed in a given situation, you're probably going to be paralyzed by inaction and anxiety. I want to make good decisions. I believe that we constantly update our algorithms through open and honest evaluation that's non-defensive. And I said that I believe that we want to put ourselves first and others a close second. And so it depends upon the circumstances. For example, let's assume I am in a building and there's one spot left in the elevator, and there's me and a pregnant woman. Now, she's not in labor. And I'm late to my office because I'm trying to get onto this call to meet with you. I'm going to probably take that last spot. And if she is a little ahead of me, I might say, excuse me, I'm very late. Is it possible I could have that spot? So I think that there's nothing wrong with accepting that there are not clear lines in the sand and that life is a bit of an art, that you want to use the idea that you put yourself first and others a close second, which doesn't mean that you're compulsive about it, that you take into account what other people think and their rights that you try not to trample upon them. But I can't give you a hard and fast rule, and I'm not sure I want to. I think that we can step back and reflect on what happens and update. There was a psychologist named George Kelly who influenced both Beck and Ellis, and he preceded both of them, and he argued that we had to update our schema. We had to update, and that neurosis was essentially not updating, not learning, making the same error. So that's my response.
Thank you, Doctor. Next one up is, it's going to be Ayala, Ingrid, and Adam. So Ayala, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder why you have not used certain language that what I have learned in the original RET and then the REBT as an old psychotherapist. The Shoudism and the masturbation were always related not just to an impression, but to a sense of entitlement that the world would happen and unfold the way you wish it to be. And what I saw Albert Ellis at least use is a lot of self-humor and self-reflection by making fun of myself, but at the same time accepting myself. I think that's a very, very important part of Albert Ellis' success. However,
can you get to the question, please?
So why didn't you mention the psychopathology that would make it harder for this kind of therapy to take place, like entitlement, narcissism?
Because, first of all, I only had 35 minutes or 40 minutes, and I had to lay the groundwork of the core concepts. That was my goal. Entitlement is an abstract concept that it co-varies with a bunch of behaviors. And so REBT it helps the person who holds entitled ideas, because if you have a sense of entitlement, you're going to disturb yourself when other people do not do your bidding. And so I would, time limitations, I could have put it in those terms. But if you came to me and said to me, in fact, earlier today, I was talking to a young woman who said she was saying, you know, I was always given what I wanted as a kid, and now my father is not doing this anymore, and he should continue it, and that's why I'm angry. And I said, no, that sense of entitlement is completely inconsistent and illogical and self-defeating. Just because he treated you that way in the past does not mean that he needs to, absolutely must continue to do that. And you're holding that attitude is angering yourself in the here and now. So I could have taken the tack of using the word entitlement, deservingness. This is what we deserve is usually debatable. But what I will do is say, maybe you can develop an attitude so that you cannot disturb yourself when you don't get what you quote unquote deserve. So that deservingness is something that we could talk about as an afterthought, but let's go with the inference that in fact, you're not going to get what you deserve, and question this idea of entitlement that you absolutely must and should get it. I mean, you know what, you're unique, but not special. It's one of the things that Albert used to say. He used humor, I use humor. But again, I think humor is a great way to work with people. I didn't touch on that. It's a way of puncturing some of their self-defeating ideas. It's a way of alliance building.
Thank you.
I didn't touch on humor today.
Thank you, folks. Thank you. Do keep your questions short so we can get through all the questions. So it's going to be Ingrid and Adam next. Ingrid, go ahead.
What is the main difference between Stoicism and REBT?
That's a very good question. One that I was contemplating writing a book on. So if I had to say the main difference, I would say 2,000 years. I really think that REBT is very consistent with Stoicism, not absolutely consistent. There are some differences. We don't speak about virtues. I've debated a little bit Massimo Paolucci on whether I don't agree with the idea, the term bettering yourself. I think you're bettering your behavior when you pursue when you implement virtues. You're not bettering yourself. You're going to be yourself today, tomorrow, and yesterday, but maybe you'll change your behavior. So there's a tremendous amount of overlap. I think REBT is an updated form of, there's a lot of talk about having a new Stoicism, a Stoicism for the modern man. And what would that look like? I think it would largely look like REBT. So I'm not sure there's the biggest difference, I think, now that I think about it, is the parsimony and the healthy negative emotions. We're very clear about healthy negative emotions and unhealthy negative emotions. I think that we're very clear about what constitutes a self-defeating attitude. They're anti-scientific, they're dogmatic, they're rigid, and I think we have a very parsimonious theory. I think Stoicism is, there are 4 virtues, 3 disciplines. I'm not so sure it's as easy to implement. After reading Stoicism, you need more help, I think. Might not be as user-friendly.
Thank you very much. That was very useful. So it's going to be Adam, Jeff S, and Sana next. Adam, go ahead. Adam, you need to unmute yourself and ask the question. Go ahead, Adam. Okay, looks like Adam is having problems, audio problems. So Jeff S is next.
Yes, hello. My question has to do with basically the popularity of REBT in this age. I was someone who studied REBT as well with Albert Ellis when he was alive, and I've noticed that since Albert Ellis passed, certainly like in the last 20 years or so, there hasn't been as much published on REBT, and there's a lot more published on other cognitive behavioral therapies such as acceptance and commitment therapy. I was wondering what you make of the lack of publications and whether on REBT in recent years, and whether you think that means that REBT has lost some popularity.
Oh, it's definitely lost popularity in the United States. There's no doubt about it. And that is much to my sorrow. The reasons for that are many, some of which include, and the lack, I think that Albert was a brilliant man, but he was not good about thinking about laying down how REBT would continue after him. I think he was, that's part of it. I think the other part of it is that American psychologists, in their quest for empirical data to support therapies, REBT has less empirical research that's been done on it. It's more philosophical. Beck was an academic researcher. Steve Hayes is an academic, and as is Marshall Linehan. And these people very often develop these therapies in research settings. They often practice very little. So they do a lot of they do a lot of research. And I think there's a bias, and in a good sense, a good bias. And it's good to know empirically what works. But on the other hand, Ellis was a practitioner and he trained a lot of practitioners. And so part of the reason why REBT isn't as popular is that there's not as strong a research. Now that's changing a little bit with the efforts of Dan David in Romania and Ray DiGiuseppe in New York and others, but here's the thing. I think the other reason why, and this is very important, so listen carefully, REBT is very hard on both the practitioner and the client. And I think that some of the other therapies in many ways are easier to practice, they're easier to do research on, and consequently, that's one issue. the issue of how it's easier to challenge an impression or an inference rather than challenging the underlying philosophy. It asks a hell of a lot more of the patient and of the therapist. Two, American psychologists are enamored with what's new. And REBT still is very popular in India and in other parts of the world, South America. And I think that American psychologists have lost their way because we like things that are new. And I'm not against innovation, but I want genuine innovation, not rebottled ideas, rebranded, repackaged. There's a book that was written in that I think, I forget, I just looked at it this morning, edited by Emmett Velton, that looked at all the people that have been influenced by Ellis. I think DBT, Marsha Linehan, has borrowed elements of REBT and gives no credit to Albert Ellis. And I've talked to her about this, and Ellis had, so I think when you in order to make a name for yourself, you got to make something new. Where I've never felt the need to, I'm not against creating a new idea, but I think that, I do pretty good just disseminating what I know. And when maybe I say it in a unique way, if I can think of a new idea to contribute, then I'll add it to the REBT idea skill set. But I think in this country, it's fallen out of favor because of a number of different reasons, one of which is we like new things. And in academia, you need to make a name for yourself by creating something new. I think I wrote a chapter looking at the similarities and differences between REBT, Beck's cognitive therapy, DBT, and ACT. And so there's a number of different reasons why I think it's fallen out of favor. But my goal is to raise awareness. And I say, and now with the internet, I'm able to bring it to the people. And so, you know what, if sooner or later academics will get interested in it again, if enough people are interested in it. And if not, so be it. I'll just help the people that are interested.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, this is a question from Arturo. He asks, does REBT hold that humans are predestined to be happy if they do not suffer from irrational beliefs?
I think the answer would be no, because it's hard not to think irrationally if you're human. It just depends upon the frequency, intensity, duration, and what you think irrationally about. So to say we're predestined to be happy, I think is not necessarily the case. I think we have the potential to have some degree of happiness, but that it needs to be cultivated.
Got it. Next question is from Sana. Sana, go ahead.
Hi, I think everybody covered everything so far. So
Sure.
Just if I want to do one thing to help myself, where do I start? Like number one.
Thank you for asking that question. Begin with, and you would be well advised to send me an email and I'll send you a brief little article.
I already did.
Hold on.
You'll see it in your email.
Hold on. I think the most important thing a human can do for themselves is to strive to give up self-esteem and come to develop unconditional self-acceptance, to accept themselves as a fallible human that has strengths and weaknesses. I think learning to accept yourself as you are, and then deciding on what you may want to change about your behavior or about certain characteristics you possess, is the most important developmental milestone a person could strive for. I think that when I die, I hope I die with a strong sense of self-acceptance, because there will definitely be failures in my wake. There will be foolish acts in my wake. There will be successes that I will look back on. But I don't want to go out not accepting myself. So I would argue, understand what it means to have unconditional self-acceptance, really strive towards a profound sense of that. And when you when you stop being self-accepting, because self-acceptance that's unconditional is a little bit like swimming to the horizon. You can't get there. You can get better at it. So, for example, I don't think I rate myself like I used to. And when I do find myself sticking my ego into things, I will strive to acknowledge that and say, wait a minute, take your ego out and acknowledge what you did or said that was stupid or good, but don't try to summate yourself. And so my advice to anyone who's asking for one idea, that would be it. Strive for self-acceptance. That doesn't mean that you then, do whatever that you want and break laws, because there are contingencies that you're going to face. I guess the second idea would be not to embrace the principle of emotional responsibility, that you disturb yourself. So there's two ideas, but if you're going to only pick one, pick self-acceptance. Unconditional, no holds bar, self-acceptance.
Thank you. That was great. That was amazing. Last two questions are going to be from Muriel and Sam. Muriel, you're next.
All right. Hi, Dr. Matweychuk. My question is about couples. And, couples also always or sometimes get into conflict when one part of the couple, one partner wants to control the other, or even if they have expectations of the other partner who have.
Muriel, keep your question very short so we can get to it.
So my question is, so how do you use REBT with two people sitting in the room?
Excellent. I'll tell you right, this is a great question. So here's how you do it. When I work with couples, I often reference John Kennedy. Don't ask of your spouse what your spouse can do for you. Ask what you could change for them. Here's what don't ask of your country what your country could do for you. Ask what you could do for your country. So you have two people. I do couples therapy. And one of the things I say is, look, too often people are both operating that the other person is the problem. And what I'm going to argue is both people are the problem. So let's do your ABC analysis. Let's do your ABC analysis. You assume responsibility for your emotional upset. Let me show you how you disturb yourself about your wife. You disturb yourself about your husband. And now what we're going to do is, once we have you both taking responsibility and accepting yourself, you'll have a better chance of sorting out and compromising and civilly discussing your goals and values. And if there are sufficient overlap in your goals and values, minus disturbance, you'll remain a couple. And if there is insufficient overlap in your goals and values, minus disturbance, you may civilly part. And that doesn't mean therapy has failed. But the first step before you change your wife or your husband is to work on having a healthy reaction to them, regardless of how disturbed they are. I read something that caught my eye. Ellis wrote, one of his first books was How to Live with a Neurotic at Home and at Work. And I read I read it, he said in an interview, this was my favorite self-help book. And I think that when we apply REBT to systems, whether they be the workplace or couples or families, we want to get everybody in the family beginning to look at themselves and take emotional responsibility for their behavior. Because if I respond to you well, I'm going to be able to meet you halfway and problem solve.
Excellent. Last question is from Sam. Sam, go ahead.
Hi. How about the victims of domestic violence, say in a couple relationship, or victims of violence like the one who go to Me Too movement? I mean, we have to be responsible. What do you think of that?
I think that if you are, I always tell people the only time to use violence is in self-defense. So I don't think it's ever appropriate to strike another person. If you're being struck by your husband or your wife, you'd be well advised to leave that relationship because you have a perfect right to live without being struck. And so domestic violence, in my view, is something that no one preferably would put up with. Now, if there are neurotic reasons why people stay in a relationship or economic reasons, so there are a lot of reasons why somebody may stay in a relationship where they're being abused. And so it's very hard to answer your question to cover every permutation. But I'm going to tell you this. If you come to me and you're telling me that your husband or your wife is hitting you, the first thing I'm going to try to do is help you have a safe environment. There's no, so I used violence when I was attacked by 4 young men because I had no choice. If you're in an environment where you're being struck, you need to get out of that environment first. In terms of the Me Too movement, I don't believe that people should abuse power. And so I'm all in favor for people having healthy boundaries between others.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Matweychuk, I'll give you the last words, and then before I thank you, but go ahead.
I think that it would be really good for you to try to teach people to not blame others for their emotions. As Epictetus said, you can't be a victim of another, you can only be a victim of yourself. That's a bit of an overgeneralization, but for the most part, it embraces the concept of emotional responsibility, which I think we've drifted from, where we're trying to get other people to conform. I've heard the expression that political correctness is really tyranny in political correctness is tyranny in, how's it go? God. Tyranny in disguise, or tyranny in politely expressed tyranny, or something like that. But what I'm getting at is, I'm saying that I believe that we need to empower people to determine their emotional destiny, while at the same time respecting the rights for other people. And that we don't want to go to either extreme, blaming other people or blaming ourselves. We want to have responsibility for emotional reactions, as Epictetus would teach, and then have a fair society. But I think that we need to bring back a little bit of the old adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I'm not at all in favor of name calling whatsoever, but I am in favor of empowering people to be able to resist emotional disturbance, because at the end of the day, you only have you to rely on. That's the person you live with, that's the person you can count on. And I say, let's really arm you to count on yourself. And then as a close second step, you can begin to try to influence others to be nice, to be kind. There's nothing wrong with kindness. There is nothing. I think the kindest, most compassionate thing you could do for somebody is empower them. So in my view, REBT's message is a very compassionate view. Take care of yourself. Let me teach you how to do it. That's my final word.
Wonderful. Dr. Matweychuk, this was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We're honored to have you here. We had more than 107 people listening, and we've, so thank you very much again. I know you have an appointment at 4 o'clock. We finished right on the dot of time. So what we are going to do now, folks, is we are going to divide into small groups, and we are going to discuss the ideas that Dr. Matweychuk has presented to us. And we do this every Saturday we do Stoicism, and we have meetups every day. So, the website for Dr. Matweychuk is rebtdoctor.com. All right. And our meetups, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity. And hopefully maybe sometime we'll do this again. Maybe we could do it some other way.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that again. You're always welcome. This was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. Ciao.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Wonderful. Folks, just stay put. I'm going to divide you into groups.